Hi guys, I'm not sure how many people are on, but I might just get cracking now in terms of introducing myself. So just to let everybody know that this session will be recorded, and we're recording now. My name is Giles Heather. I'm an Associate Director at Linesight, and I'll be your host for this roundtable discussion today. My role during the session is to facilitate an interactive discussion directly with you and our chosen topic. So please can I just ask that when you would like to speak, please declare your name, your job title, your company, so that all attendees know who you are and who's speaking. And just to avoid any unwanted background noise, please could we mute when we're not speaking, unless you wish to speak. So thanks for that. So our topic then is around sustainable construction methods and materials. So this roundtable will explore the challenges of embodied carbon and lowering warehouse emissions and discuss new innovative construction methods and materials for providing solutions to achieving our net zero buildings. So to kick off then, sort of the first question I've sort of got to the floor is really, what is embodied carbon and why is it so important? So would anyone like to start with that one? Don't be shy. Well, I think I'll maybe start. So I think for me, when we talk about embodied carbon, what we're really saying is, it's the emissions associated with this extraction, manufacture, transportation, assembly, replacement, and deconstruction of materials and products. And essentially, why is it important? I guess it's because a lot of stats tell us that embodied carbon contributes to 11% of all global carbon emissions. So it's quite an important piece and something that we should really focus on. Does anyone have anything to add to that point? I mean, what do people think about the challenges of embodied carbon? Is there anything that people would want to bring to the table to discuss? Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, can hear you great, Giles. Just wanted to add, if anybody, feel free to turn your cameras on and mics. There's also, if you'd rather ask questions in the chat, you can use or answer questions in the chat. You can use the chat feature that's just on the right.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hi, David. Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I had a few problems with my sound there. So, can I just put up my 2 penneth worth on that?
Absolutely.
I've worked within the logistics sector for 20 years with a couple of different cladding manufacturers, and it's something I think we've been probably a little bit ahead of the game, and we are one of Tata Steel's largest customers in the UK. And it's something we've been looking at probably for about the last 15 years. We've been involved with a scheme called Comfort X Sustain. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware of what that is, but it's something that Tata offer, that we have environmental product declarations for all of our products, and we can offer the client a carbon neutral building envelope. So all of the embodied carbon that goes from, and that's a cradle to cradle scheme. So all of the embodied carbon from the manufacturing of the ore all the way through the manufactured steel processing, our manufacturing, delivery to site, installation and end of life is captured and Tata offset. I know people have various opinions about it, but they offset all of that carbon within the Covered X Sustain scheme.
Okay.
And it's something they've been running, I think, probably for around about 15 years.
Okay.
But it would be interesting now. I think offsetting gets a bit of a bad name, but it'd be interesting to hear what other people's opinions are of that.
No, definitely, absolutely. And what is the take up for clients in utilising that scheme?
In terms of actual figures, I'm not quite sure. It used to be something that was very, very popular.
Yeah.
And then probably the last 5 years, it's sort of died off a little bit, and people haven't taken up that option. But I have noticed in the last 12 months that it does seem to be coming back again. It's something that is back on, and I think everybody's taking a little bit. I think in general with sustainability, I think it has been probably off the table a little bit, and it's coming back. And I've noticed that with the discussions I have with our clients and their design teams.
Yeah.
That it does seem to be having a little bit of a resurgence.
And do you feel that there's sort of an awareness and an understanding of the requirements and what's out there? So in terms of the scheme that we're discussing at the moment, do you feel that people can see that things like that are happening and there's awareness of it, or do you think it's very sort of siloed?
No, I don't think there is. And again, I think it's sort of quiet, and it's during that quiet period. It hasn't. I don't think Tata have particularly gone out in the market and explained that it is still there. But I think it is becoming more of a discussion point again.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else have a sort of an opinion on that, or want to bring anything to the floor?
Yeah, we have a very quiet group.
I mean, I think that's fantastic, David. I think that that type of scheme is something that I would hope that the industry, the sector, would have an awareness of and would like to sort of push through. I think some of the key challenges that I think is out there is ultimately that awareness and demand for something. It's really important that people in industry know and understand the significance of embodied actually means. There's been a lot of emphasis on operational emissions, I suppose, in an asset life cycle and what that means as well, but also having the skills, the capabilities and the capacity to be able to deliver on these things as well is probably quite key, and then obviously turning that into policy and regulation which allows and drives the necessary investment in technologies and processes that people need. So I absolutely agree, and I think as well that the data and technology are probably certainly from an embodied carbon standpoint are probably a little bit in their infancy. We probably don't have, although you have said that scheme's been running for 15 years, I think ultimately the transparency of that and maybe the collaboration element of people having the visibility of that data to be able to sort of understand it and know the sort of direction in which we're going is probably fundamentally key to that. And then
it would be interesting. That's why I asked the question. Where was anybody aware of the scheme? Because it is quite a long scheme. It has in the past been very well publicised, probably less so now. And although it's sort of it's policed by Tata, it is independently verified. I think PricewaterhouseCoopers are involved, and I think they oversee the scheme. But a little bit in terms of what we do, and if anybody's not aware, I work for a company called Euroclad Group, and we are probably one of the largest manufacturers of metal cladding systems in the UK. We're ultimately owned now by Kingspan, who, although they want to say we compete against. But as I said, I think our sector, our industry has been very proactive. As I say, certainly in the 20 years I've worked, and it's always been it's always been something that we strive to. But one of the things I was going to ask is, what are the opinions of people have of the actual envelope, and what your thoughts are on what we do? Do you think, in your knowledge, that what we're doing is right and what we do is good?
Well, chaps, I have a question here from James Horton, who says, apologies, his mic and camera don't seem to want to work. He says, on the point raised on offsetting, given the scale of the challenge here, James says he'd say that has a part to play. What do you guys think of that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it does have a part to play. I suppose going down to the specifics of it, I guess from a Euroclad perspective, do we, David, think in terms of what ways or means do you use in terms of offsetting from your perspective, I guess?
Well, in terms of specific schemes? Yeah. Ooh, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
Changes. I know something that changes from year to year, and obviously we don't play skimming, and we do that through Tata. So I think if we want to, if anybody wants the information, I could certainly go away and get that. But it's not something that we're sort of involved in a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. No, that's fine. I mean, does anyone else have a view on that in terms of offsetting? What's being done to offset in organisations?
For what it's worth, and just because nobody else is talking, I'm always a bit wary about offsetting, because I think it potentially gives a license to do what you like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where actually we shouldn't be offsetting, we should be reducing.
Very good point.
And I'm actually based up near Inverness, and we were looking at a completely different economy and everything else logistically from city centre London. So I'm perhaps not talking to the same audience, but one of the groups I was looking at Skye in particular, which is a very rural location, and it's an island location. And there was a group set up just before the pandemic set up about looking at circular economy, and looking at the extent to which that kind of bubble could be used as a means of developing a scenario where materials could be shared. So if you were buying a pallet of bricks and you only use 50% of them, somebody else within the area could go in and take that to the other 50% off and use them. And then once a unit had been finished with, then it could be broken down and folk could say, well, I'll have that, I'll have this, I'll have that. Now, okay, Hicks and the Sticks and Skye have got it right for Skye. That wouldn't instantly transfer to a city centre location, perhaps, and there's lots of different reasons, planning, quality of materials, and this sort of the history of the use of the materials. But that kind of concept in terms of circularity, I see much more long-term benefit from than just buying a plot of land in the Amazon rainforest and planting some trees on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can I just answer that from our point of view? And it was the reason I mentioned cradle to cradle, because the systems that we manufacture are we say 100% recyclable. And in terms of our environmental product declaration, the only thing that is excluded, I think, is the sealants and the tapes, which take up about 0.1% of the overall material. So the majority of it is obviously steel. So we have a steel liner, steel outer, and a bracket and bar system, and a man-made mineral fibre. So all of that product is in theory recyclable. And I say in theory, because if we take, for example, the insulation, it's a benign man-made mineral fibre, but its origins are from glass and sand. So it can be fully recycled. The problem the manufacturers have is that there are only a couple of facilities in the UK, and sometimes it actually takes more carbon to take the insulation and transport it to the recycling plant. So in that instance, it can go in. As I said, it is benign. It can go into landfill. But in terms of our system, so it can all be recycled at the end of life, in theory. And whether that happens is something that is generally out of our control, because we supply the material and it's up to the client then. But in the future, it is something that we're going to look at is things like a take-back scheme, where we can provide that steel, but then take it back at the end of life, and whether that's 20, probably 30 years down the line, and then reuse it. But if you look at the steel industry in as a whole, I think somewhere like about 90% of all steel now comes from recycled material.
Okay.
So we've made great strides. But the other thing that's remember in terms of, because one of the things we were going to talk about is about product. And in terms of our actual product, there's not a great deal more we can do in terms of making it more sustainable. It's something that's been developed over the last, our company has been going for 40 years. And people say, well, we look at U values, and we can improve the U values of our product. The problem is that exponentially, it doesn't have the same effect. So we put more embodied carbon into the building by making the cladding deeper. And what we're looking at is improving efficiency. So we've been driving down things like air tightness, because that makes a far greater difference to the overall performance of the building than just increasing the U values.
Okay.
David.
Yeah.
You were talking about the product and
yes.
and also just before that you were talking about, yes, you can recycle, but there's a lot of energy going into recycling, and so looking at reuse and take backs in 20, 30 years. I'm just wondering whether in terms of the product, actually a standardization of your product with a sort of data sheet that says you can reuse this if you do X, Y, and Z. And then if you have a sort of standard thing that's X by X that can then be fitted into a warehouse first time round and a block of flats second time round, and it's still sustainable. So it's not so much changing the product itself. It's a standardization of the thing, but also the data sheets and I'm trying to think the history and the provenance of the material through its life.
Yeah, and the problem we have with that, as I say, individually the components can be recycled. Our problem in that is that ours is a site assemble system. So all of it's not like for example, somebody like Kingspan or our sister company Eurobond, who make a manufactured complete panel and deliver it outside the site. So ours is an independent liner out sheet, bracket and bar. So it's demountable at the end. It's not like a solid panel like you can just demount and take somewhere else. So it is slightly different. But what I was going to say is, so in terms of our product, we think we've gone as far as we can in terms of what we can offer in terms of sustainability, and we can continue and look at things like driving down air tightness. But one of the things we do as a company, and looking at more holistically, is looking at things like our transport manufacturing processes. Kingspan have a scheme, our parent company have a scheme called Planet Passionate, and part of that scheme is looking at we're all switching to electric vehicles.
Okay.
We're looking at how the energy we use within our manufacturing process, the transport we use. So it's all of the things that outside the product within our manufacturing, and how we act as a company. Yeah, and that's our sort of the next stage of what we're doing.
So are you investing in electric vehicles now? Is this?
We are, yes. In fact, I got delivered my Tesla about 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And that's a gradual. I had a diesel before that, and it's a gradual process. So as and when our current vehicles come up to the end of their lease, they already have that in place. Everybody, even the people who are on their own private scheme where they're actually get a contribution, they only get a contribution if they actually go out and buy or lease an electric vehicle, and they're all fully electric. They're not going down the hybrid route. So,
okay.
And if you take our own manufacturing facility, we're looking at mounting PVs on each of our buildings. We're looking at talking to things like our energy supplier about how much of that energy that we use comes from natural resources, so wind turbine, etc. So,
okay, very interesting, very interesting. And then, what in terms of using that solar power, are you looking to utilize that energy to become ultimately renewable, in essence?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
One of the other things we do, because all of our systems, for example, all of our roof systems are all designed to enable the addition of PVs. We have the ability. There's a technology called transpired solar collectors, which I'm not sure if anybody's heard, but we can all of our systems again are designed so you can tack on the end. We can have a transpired solar collector added to our cladding system as well.
Okay, interesting. And do you think there's enough?
Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes.
It's James here. I was battling with my mic earlier. I was shouting at the screen, but nothing was happening. Just a couple of points. I thought you made an interesting point yesterday on your discussion in terms of, the skills that we've got in terms of being able to build effectively, which I don't think Mark initially got, but he did get it in the end. And I think that obviously, we've looked at modern methods of construction and how that fits in. I'm a construction lawyer by background, but that I think is something that we've looked at, and I think the industry, as far as I can see, and the others on this call may well correct me, but my take is that this sector is off-site and how it constructs its assets. So that's one thing, but no doubt that will accelerate across the industry, the construction industry more widely. The other point in terms of, because I think, David, you were making some interesting points about steel earlier, and my take again is that there's an incredible challenge in just the terms of the raw materials that we've got, how much carbon that produces, and what's been said a number of times is that the actual build phase really does create a huge amount of carbon, and how do we deal with that? I saw an interesting article on the steel industry the other day that McKinsey had produced in terms of how can we get such a carbon intensive process such as steel making towards being greener, and no doubt, as you say, offsetting other aspects will form part of that, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of investments to do that, and it's not going to happen in 5 years, 10 years. It's going to be a 20, 30 year process, and the sooner the better is my take on it. Bringing in things like hydrogen in terms of the manufacturing process of that product. The article was talking about short term, what you do at the moment to try and reduce your the amount of carbon you produce, retrofitting existing refineries and such like, and then longer term investing in technology as much as you can do to bring in ultimately a greener solution. But it's not going to be something, or at least my take is, it's not going to be something that's going to happen in the next few years. It's going to take a long time to get that right. That was just some thoughts in particularly on steel. But of course, I think there's been some interesting things said about other products that we could use, interesting use of timber and the like, which could also help, I imagine.
Well, I think going back to what I said before, and I think the use of carbon offsetting is almost a necessity. because we have got such a long journey. We've done a lot, but there's a lot more we can do moving forward to improve all of our processes. And till that happens, offsetting has got a place. But what I imagine in the future is that we'll get to a point where we can reduce all of that embodied carbon within our other processes. But I think even then, carbon offsetting might still have a place, because then it's looking at a positive. You're going into a positive, so you're not replacing a negative. That we can still get to a point where we're producing zero carbon, but we can still offset additional to cover other areas of the industry where it's impossible to do that. That makes sense.
I mean, it amazes me how much this has shifted up the agenda over the last couple of years or so. I mean, we've done an awful lot on net zero as a firm, and how we can assist clients on that and on their journey to net zero. But it strikes me that you've got the transport sector itself, which is actually doing pretty well in terms of, if you look at EVs and hydrogen and where that's all going. Likewise, energy production. If you look at all the amount of renewable power that we've been able to do as and shift to as well, but the built environment itself seems that's way behind lagging in terms of how it's going to get to being carbon neutral, or net zero, as we say. That is a huge challenge, and something where, as I say, it's lagging. I suppose it's lagging for a number of reasons, because of processes as we've got them have worked well for us to this point. But now, given this is coming so much more focus, I'm sure that over the next few years there's going to be an awful lot of work that needs to be done to change that.
Absolutely, and totally agree with you. I think part of that as well is around the retrofitting aspect of what we've got in our industry in terms of the built environment. And when you look at the stats of, I think it was 80% of built assets have already been built that are required in the next 30 years. I think that really shows a red flag in terms of what are we going to do to be able to undertake that mammoth task of retrofitting to make sure that we are enabling for that reduction in emissions, whether it be through operationally or through the embodiment of buildings as well. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Can I ask David on what you're doing? Are you looking at all at timber technologies and the interfaces between your products and sort of timber framed buildings, etc., CLT or whatever?
Yes, I mean, it's something we have done in the past. We've worked on timber frame buildings. It's just a large part of our market. Is the industrial sector.
I mean, there is a move towards using particularly kind of cross-laminated timber or whatever to make much bigger. We're moving away from houses, and now we're going to schools and even high-rise flats. I think folk are looking at, or certain sectors are looking at timber in the same way that they were looking at steel, 20, 30 years ago. But I'm just wondering whether there's an interface issue. Can you just replace a steel frame with a timber frame and your products just work seamlessly?
You can, yes. Yeah. All we would need to do is change the fixings that we use to attach from the liner into the timber, and it is something we've done on numerous occasions in the past. So it is possible.
So do you see that, David, as an opportunity then, rather than a potential threat? I guess.
I think it's something, and not a conversation I have. But I used to be my previous company. We did a lot of work. We probably built most of the B&Qs in the UK, and they looked at timber frame buildings. And I think at the time we sort of ticked the box a little bit, but it was something they didn't pursue. They did it a couple of times, and I think other clients and developers have looked at it as well. But I think they've come to the conclusion that it's possibly not so sustainable as what you may think.
And I think it's actually a really good point, because you look at the comparators of using modern methods, and you look at the more traditional forms, and okay, there are probably certain companies, organisations, individuals in industry and sectors that understand it, but ultimately, until we really know the differentials and the benefits that modern methods can actually provide us, and whether that does actually have a genuine impact on embodied carbon, on operational carbon, then the direction that we go is kind of almost built around that.
Hi there. Sorry, I just had some observations just listening in. Actually, sorry, I've come to the conversation a little bit late. We're Hollis involved in project management and building surveyors, and just pick up. Hi there. Just some of the other comments in our experience, and I wanted to echo a lot of what David Sleeth said of SEGRO on the call yesterday and his presentation, which I thought was really interesting. Their commitment as a client, which we work with, is to get themselves, I think, by net zero by 2030, but all of their occupiers, their customers, which is a real challenge. And I think the easy bit, so what we've seen, I like what David said, is we have seen on project management over the last 12 months for sure, a position where over 12 months ago, there was only a select few clients like SEGRO really interested in net zero properly. To now, we'll have a multitude of clients looking over the fence to what their neighbours doing and want to match the neighbours' development in terms of net zero. Sorry, my point was, I think we've taken the easy win, which is when we talk about net zero, the operational net zero. So for us, we've nearly taken that definition around producing an EPC of an existing building, producing the EPC to how to get it to net zero, and then luckily putting a load of PV on the roofs. I think what we'll see change, I think there's less data, and I haven't done a lot of research on this, around the embedded carbon.
Yep.
And then we've all spoken about it. If you're thinking about an industrial unit, there's a hell of a lot of steel, there's some wrinkly tin metal, and there's a concrete slab. And we all know that interface carpets and others do net zero, and the carpets and the bits that go in are the easy bits. But there has to be an alternative to wrinkly tin metal, steel, or concrete.
Sorry, can I pick you up on that? And you call it wrinkly tin. I think it's a little bit disrespectful, because our systems are highly engineered, and they've been developed over hours, particularly over 40 years. And as I've said, we are probably, if you look at material, there's not much else we can do in terms of insulation and driving down things like air tightness to make the building envelope as best as possible. So I think there's a lot of people in the industry a long way behind us. And I think that's, I honestly think it is a little bit disrespectful what you just said.
Oh no, I wasn't making any accusations of anyone. I was just thinking about the components of an industrial unit are some cladding, a steelwork frame, and a concrete slab. And as an industry, it'd be great to look if there are alternatives. And I'm thinking actually about the steel frame. Is there an alternative material which is less embodied carbon? My other point is, I think at the moment there's less awareness and data around the embodied carbon piece. I expect that to change. So no apologies. There was no reflection on any components or on the cladding industry.
Stuart, if you look at timber as being a potential replacement for steel, the reality is there isn't the production. Just forget about product, material supply shortages at the moment. Just forget, just pretend that we had a totally normal market. There is not enough timber production going on either domestically within the UK or within Europe to actually feed the potential demand for this, and it's a massive problem. It's a massive problem for everything, particularly modern methods of construction. If you look at modular buildings, the ideal material for doing stuff in a factory would be using timber in its various forms, but there's just not enough timber. It's just like, and we need to bottom line, we need to plant more trees.
I think one of the things that will come out, because we're in exactly the same boat in terms of steel. So there was a shortage of raw material, which generally comes out of China and India, partly caused by the pandemic. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. We get a quarter of steel from our suppliers every year. We increased that by 20% this year because we were really busy last year, and we anticipated what we thought was going to happen this year. We sat here now, it's not even the end of May, and we've actually already sold the whole of our quarter of steel for this year. And we're well into our quarter for Q1 of next year. And that's sort of indicative, I think, across the industry of things like cement and plasterboards and bricks. And I think what it will make people look at alternatives. And rather than having all of the eggs in one basket, and I think it's something that we probably will have to do. You know, if we come across it, this is going to become long term, we're going to have to look at how we manufacture our products, and we're going to have to adapt. Because if we don't, and everybody else and nobody else does, we're going to be in a position where we may not have any materials to manufacture to build the buildings that we obviously require.
Just chipping in, sorry, it's Nick Penny from Travis Perkins. So absolutely recognise all the conversation around materials and stuff, and you know, there's lots of publicity at the moment. We're seeing it firsthand. One of the conversations we were actually having yesterday was sort of internally. A lot of our clients are now, you know, particularly the sort of public sector ones, are desperately wanting to know about the materials and the data behind it and the sustainability and the conversations, the embedded carbon. And we're trying to get our heads around where do you get that data? How do you piece it together? And I mean, I'm absolutely no expert in any of this, but just be interested as to whether there are any thoughts as to is there a data set? Is there a kind of forum that people are looking at this? Is I don't know where to really start.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with you. I think actually the US came up with an embedded or embodied carbon calculator, which was free for use for their industry. But I don't know if there's anything quite like that, especially in the UK at the moment. But it is definitely something that needs to be looked at, I guess. And it's, I guess, from your perspective, David, obviously, because we're talking about steel, in terms of what you've done previously and in terms of providing those product breakdowns and, you know, understanding the origin of the materials and obviously the embodied carbon element, how have you managed to do that? What is sort of been your process?
It's something that we are getting asked, and I mentioned before, we have an EDP, APD, environmental product declaration for all of our products. So we can look. We have all of that data for our products, and we're getting asked for that more and more. And somebody mentioned Seadrill. We've been working with Seadrill for the last year, and they see us as a sustainable supplier. But we haven't now to take that a little bit further, so we can prove we have all of the data to prove what we claim in terms of our products being as sustainable as possible where we sit today. But again, it goes to having a more holistic view of things. So one of the conversations we've been having with Seadrill and other developers is how we can maximise the use of the building envelope. So one of the things we were discussing was having, for example, a zonal roof. So if you think of what we can contribute in terms of roof lights, PVs, and things like green roofs, it's very, very difficult to supply all of those on one building, because a lot of time within the design process, it's decide, right, we're going to do this building, or we're going to have 10% roof lights, and this is the way it's going to be designed. Then come along after and said, well, if we thought about it before, we could have maybe put a bit of green roof on there. We could do water harvesting. So that's been part of the conversations we've been having, is again a more holistic view of how these buildings are designed and how we can interface with other parts of the supply chain. And I'll give you a perfect example of that, because one of the discussions we had was about parapets around buildings. And this particular client had a requirement. They said, well, we have to have a parapet because of the health and safety, and we can't avoid people going up on the roof. So part of what we've been working on is we've been working with latchways who provide the walkways and the handrails, but also with a green roof company who also did green walls, obviously, and how we can actually adapt and create the handrail and add a green wall element to it, but then attach it to our roof. If that makes sense. So it almost becomes a feature of the building. But that's an example of a client working with three or four people from their supply chain, all sat around the table and deciding how we can contribute. And obviously a part of that, the roof light manufacturer as well, and the PV manufacturer, and actually all sitting down in a room and throwing these ideas about it and saying, well, if we put the PVs on the southern elevation and then open up the north elevation and have perhaps green roof on there, and how we can zone, as I said, how we can zone those roof areas to best contribute towards the building.
And is that seen as a reduction in operational carbon, or are you seeing that as a reduction in body? Because again, I think when you talk about solar panels, you talk about green roofs. I suppose that's an operational sort of efficiency. But is that something that you would account for in the embodied element as well?
An expert, I would imagine it probably covers a bit of both.
Yeah. Okay.
It's something we can add to the building in terms of our roof system. We don't really have to adapt it.
So I think that point you made there, David, is a really neat one, because if you think about it, on the construction side, a lot of great stuff comes from when you've got supply chain, employer, client, designers all involved at an early stage in having those discussions. So you'll see, the construction playbook that government's issued and the like, promotion of that kind of contracting, having those early discussions, not just on an individual project, but at a broader, more industry scale, to try and come up with these good ideas. Because it's great that those things will happen in isolation on individual projects, but it's also going to be a question of trying to do that on a bigger scale as well. So I think getting supply chain involved at an early stage to be able to allow them to comment and come up with good ideas like that is a great thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to go in the future. I'm saying I think every supplier, I think everybody's on a journey of trying to reduce their embodied carbon and improve their manufacturing processes. But I think that is an area where as an industry we can improve, and have a little bit more of cross thinking.
Yeah,
agreed. So in terms of that improvement, then, guys, do we think that what are the steps, I guess, for us to be able to sort of move forward and improve on what we've already got currently? Is there anything that anyone has in mind in terms of next steps to meet these targets for 2050? I think one that we mentioned was obviously collaboration. I think that's absolutely at the forefront of it. I think you're absolutely right. I think maybe, establishing some sort of roadmap and a clear vision and goal for the industry as a whole, all the way down the value chain, is probably fundamental. I don't know, we've probably done that or are doing that, but maybe it's not as clear as we need it to be.
I think one of the positive things, if you look, for example, that when they brought out the London 2050 plan, it appears, I think a lot of the developers and a lot of the clients have been very proactive, and I think a lot of them are saying we don't want to wait till 2050, and they're coming up with ideas what we want to do by 2030 or 2025, and I think that's one of the really positive things that have come out of it.
Definitely,
I think that's right. I mean, you're seeing what Segro was saying yesterday, and what a number of different developers and other stakeholders bringing back forward those very challenging targets is almost going to force the market to react. I mean, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of money as well, frankly. and you know and design and forethought to make it happen. But setting that agenda quickly and
Sorry,
All gone.
we dropped out there. Well, I don't know what happened there. Jake, are you there? It's just me and you a bit.
As the roundtable ended, it was. I think the idea is that it's supposed to keep us all in the chat.
Oh, it finished, did it?
It finished, yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
I popped a warning in the chat, but
Sorry.
my understanding was that it was supposed to finish, and then we would all stay in this room and we could carry on chatting, but apparently not.
I see. Okay, no worries.
I think that went really well.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it got. It was good. I think it was a bit of a slow start, but as with all these things, I think that happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It takes it. Nobody wants to be the first person to stick their hand up and
That's it.
start chatting. But yeah, no, I think it went really well in the end. I'm pleased with that.
Good. Yeah, me too. I think there was some really. I think it's great there was a mix of people there that were able to kind of have their input. I think having a guy heavily involved in the steel side of things, and then having some consultants and some lawyers on that, you know, it just gives a really good perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of different kind of different takes, which is always good. Just a shame. I really thought what I thought would happen is that it would kind of end and the recording would end, which is fine, and then we'd all still be in the room and could kind of wrap up.
Yeah, I was too, because there was a couple more questions I wanted to ask people, but no, I think it was good. It was good.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, look, cheers for that. Really well done. And I'll catch up. I'll try and share the recording with you when it comes available.
Great stuff. Thank you.
All right. Cheers for that, Giles.
Cheers. Bye bye.